We have arrived at that point. The last Mishnah of Pirkei Avos. Do not be fooled that just because it's a short one, that it's an easy one. Do not be fooled. So let's take a look. Don't be fooled by the fact that it's a short Mishnah, because you have to bear in mind, number one, this should, in a certain respect, summarize the whole of Pirkei Avos, somehow. Second of all, this chapter has all been about Kinyan HaTorah, about acquiring the Torah, so this must be in that context as well of what does it mean to acquire the Torah. And it won't be immediately apparent. Look what it says. The Torah, the Mishnah goes as follows. Kol ma shebara HaKadosh Baruch Hu be'olamoi, everything that Hashem created in His world. Okay? In His world. Now you've got to ask yourself, why does it say in His world? Why doesn't it just say whatever Hashem created ba'olam, in the world? Nevertheless, that's what it says. Whatever Hashem created in His world, loi bera'oi ela lichvoidoi. He did not create other than for His glory or honor. Right? Both are valid translations of the word kavod. And there also you can ask the question, why doesn't it just say whatever Hashem created, bara lichvoidoi, He created for His honor? Why does it specifically say loi bera'oi, He did not create it, ela lichvoidoi, except for His honor? And then he proves it. Shenemra, there's a pasuk that tells us, Kol anikra bishmi v'lichvoidi, any person who calls out with my name and calls out to my honor, bera'asiv, I have created him, yetzarativ, I have formed him, af asisiv. Now, if you look in the older translations, they put in over there the word yea, Y-E-A. Yea, I have also made him, which is there for emphasis, because the word af is an interesting word over here. Af means but, usually, or even. And here it's saying that I've even created, right? I've even made. I've created and I've formed and I've even made him. So we need to understand, right? So we need to understand, okay, him or it, because Kol HaNikra is talking about a person, right? But here we're going to learn that it's also something which is assigning awareness of Hashem. So I've created, I've formed, and I've made. We need to understand what the difference is between those things. Ve'oimer, and it also says, Hashem yimloich la'olam va'ed, that Hashem will rule forever and ever. Okay. Did you see Torah in there? Did you see Torah in there? Whatever Hashem created in His world, He did not create other than for His honor. And then 2 verses to prove it. Now, this is the chapter about Kinyan HaTorah, about acquiring the Torah. Did you see a reference to the Torah in that Mishnah? No? No, right? There's no word Torah there. There's no word learning there. There's no word teaching. All of the things that you would have associated with the Torah are not in that Mishnah. So the first thing we have to try and understand is, what is this to do with the theme of the Mishnah, of this chapter? The theme of this chapter is all about Hashem, is all about acquiring the Torah. So where does that come into this particular Mishnah? Now, the unfortunate thing is, any person who responded that you do not see the Torah in this Mishnah, it's a sign we have to go back and review what we've already learned previously, because in chapter 4 we learned that, not in chapter 4, in Mishnah 4 of this chapter, we learned Ein kavod ela Torah. We learned that the term kavod, the term honor or glory, refers to the Torah. Because if you remember, we learned at the beginning of this chapter, like I say in the 4th Mishnah, we learned that if a person teaches you something, even if they only teach you a single letter, right? We said if they teach you a parasha or even a word or even a single letter, then you are required to show them kavod. You're required to show them respect, to show them honor. And then in that Mishnah, it said, Ve'ein kavod ela Torah. There is no other appropriate version of kavod, of honor, outside of Torah. Therefore, if it says over here that everything that Hashem created was lich voidoi, for His honor, we already know, based on what we've learned earlier in this chapter, that means it's for the Torah. So that's really what this mission is telling us, that every single thing that Hashem created, He created for the purpose of the Torah, and obviously for our purpose, because we are the practitioners of Torah. Without us, the Torah is impotent. You need people to firstly learn the Torah and to apply the Torah in their lives. So that's really the message of this Mishnah, and that's why it's a good summary of the chapter, all about acquiring Torah, because it's basically telling us everything that we've learned, this whole chapter, that's the reason the world was created. The whole purpose of the world was in order for us to be able to learn Torah, in order for the Torah to be able to have an influence on the world. And influence on the world is going to be a very big part of our conversation, as we shall see. So certain of the commentaries, like for example the Maharal, say in the previous Mishnah we said that Hashem had 5 special possessions. One of those possessions was the Torah, but it didn't necessarily highlight that the Torah is the ultimate of all of the possessions that Hashem has and that he cherishes in his world. So therefore we need this Mishnah to tell us, yes, there are 5 special things in the creation, but out of the 5 special things, the one that is the most important is the Torah itself. And again, bearing in mind that Torah without the Jewish people is not really the Torah, it's just knowledge. So that's the flow from the previous Mishnah to this Mishnah. However, if you think that it's as simple as that this is just a story telling us that you have to realize the entire purpose of the world is for the Torah, as I said, don't be fooled by the fact that this is a short Mishnah. It is an incredibly profound Mishnah. We're going to start with the Midrash Shmuel. The Midrash Shmuel identifies that there are 4 phrases in the verse that is quoted in this Mishnah. The first verse, we'll still have to see why there are 2 verses, but the first verse that is quoted in this Mishnah has 4 phrases, and those 4 phrases are incredibly relevant to understanding the structure of existence. So what are the 4 phrases? Well, the obvious ones are, Berasiv, I created it or him. Yetzarativ, I formed it or him. Asisiv, I've even made it or him. So those are 3 of the 4 expressions. What's the other expression? Barasi, I created. Yetzarativ, I formed. Asisiv, I made. What's the 4th? Because there are 4 expressions, right? What's the 4th expression there? Okay, interesting. The 4th expression is close by. Kavoidi, ma'ana, which is obviously the centerpiece of this Mishnah, because this Mishnah is that Hashem created everything for his honor. So we've got to understand what is Kavoidi, my honor, versus Barasiv, Yetzarativ, Asisiv. Can you hear the difference? Kavoidi, my honor, versus created it or him, formed it or him, made it or him, which is obviously, so to speak, external. Let's just understand. What's the difference between saying mine versus saying him or it? What's the difference? The first person versus the third person, right? Kavoidi, my honor. That's obviously very close, very personal. And the others are external, third person. I created it. I formed it. I made it. Okay? The other thing we're also going to have to look at in this pasuk is how come when it comes to the part about made it, it says first the word af, even. I even made it. It says in Midrash Shmuel, this pasuk is telling us about what we call the 4 worlds. Are we familiar with the concept of the 4 worlds? Let's talk about the 4 worlds and understand what they are and how they relate to these various things. So we're told in many places in Kabbalah that Hashem, and the truth is it's in Midrashim as well, although not as expressed and not as enunciated. We're told that Hashem created existence effectively at 4 levels. Now, what's interesting about this is that whatever exists in the macro is reflected in the micro. That means that if Hashem created across the whole of creation 4 different realities, then we have to expect that inside our world, there are going to be 4 different realities. And we have to expect that within ourselves, there are going to be 4 different realities. So we can look at the macro, the micro, or the micro. Okay, so there's the big world, there's our world, and then there's ourselves. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because it's quite useful sometimes to be able to look at our world or ourselves in order to understand what's going on in the big spiritual worlds, which are already beyond us. Quite frankly, we don't really understand. Even what we're going to speak about today, the expression that we use in Hasidus is we say what we're going to discuss today is called Yedias Hametzius, knowing the facts, but it's not Hasagas Hamahus, which means truly appreciating the facts. And I'll explain what that means. So if I told you as a fact that right now the electricity is off, you don't just know this as a fact, you're experiencing it. And the reason you're experiencing it is because the air conditioning is not on. And so it's not as comfortable as it usually would be inside the room. So that's what we call Hasagas Hamahus. You actually have a real, meaningful, personal experience of what's going on. Whereas if somebody had to speak mathematical formulae to us, that would be Yedias Hametzius. We know that they exist. We don't necessarily have a personal experience of a mathematical formula. Okay? So likewise, when we speak about spiritual concepts, we speak about them as information, not as experience. We can't experience these things, we can't even imagine them. So that's why it's very useful to look at things in our own reality. Let's start from the bottom. Why do we start from the bottom? Because it's a lot more relatable for us. Now, we've seen that the last word on the list is the word asisiv, I made it. And based on that, in Kabbalah, they use the term the world of asiya, the world of action. Then you've got here the word yetzarativ, that Hashem formed it. So that is related to a world called yetzira, the world of formation. Before that, you had the word berasiv, I created it. That refers to an even higher world, which is called the world of bria, the world of creation. And then the word kavoidi, my honor, says the Midrash Shmuel, that refers to Atzilus, which is the highest world that exists. So we now have names, which is very useful. We have no clue what any of them mean, but that's okay. At least we have names. It's a good starting point. Names are 4 worlds. So in ascending order, you have Asiya, which is the lowest. Then you have Yetzira, which is higher. Then you have Bria, which is higher than that. Then you have Atzilus, which is the highest of them all. So anybody willing to take a guess where we live? We live in Asiya, right? The truth of the matter is, if you really want to be very prudent, you say, we live in Asiya of Asiya. Because each one of these realities also exists in multiple levels. So we live in the spiritual basement of creation. Okay, that's where we live. Which is a place, that's why it's called the world of Asiya, because what's the single most important thing we have to do as Jewish people? Do. Right? The most important thing is that we're actually doing what Hashem wants. So even if we don't necessarily have all the right emotional intention and all the right understanding, the mitzvah is still a mitzvah. So if a person puts a mezuzah on their door, they have absolutely no idea why they're doing it. Fact is, they have 100% fulfilled the mitzvah of putting a mezuzah on their door. Whereas if you were theoretically living in one of these higher worlds, you could do all the things and they count for nothing. In those higher worlds, you actually have to have a meaningful experience, okay? So without getting overly technical, so the world of Asiya, this is really, really important for us to understand. The world of Asiya has a physical and a spiritual side to it, okay? So the physical side of this world of Asiya, it's the only one of the worlds that has a physical side, is our physical universe. But the spiritual side of Asiya includes such things as negative spiritual forces. So for example, if you want to talk about Shadim, demons, they're spiritual, they belong to the world of Asiya. It could also refer to positive spiritual energies that are within this level of creation. We had a teacher when we were in yeshiva. He was a brilliant, brilliant Talmid Chacham, unbelievable. I think I might have told you the story once before, that he sometimes sat down to learn something and then got up 48 hours later, not realizing the time had passed. So it was that kind of scholar. And he used to say, if I would describe to you a spiritual being living in the world of Asiya, you would think that I'm actually describing the most advanced spiritual being that exists. So it's difficult for us to imagine that there's this world which is so low, and yet, compared to us, is so incredibly profound. So we just have to keep that in mind. But really what's most relevant to us is that this is the world in which we live. That's really what's most relevant to us. The world beyond that, I'm going to just go in ascending order quickly, just to put it into some kind of structure, and then we'll see how it is actually an evolutionary process. So the world beyond us is called the world of Yetzirah. That is the world of Gan Eden. That is the world of the lesser angels. That is a world where there are spiritual beings. There's nothing physical. That is a world where it is not possible to rebel against Hashem, but it is possible to believe that you have your own independent role to play, so to speak. And that is a world which is effectively defined by this incredible emotional attachment to Hashem. So the beings who live there, which are mostly angels, or the neshamas of people who've gone into Gan Eden, is that they have this incredible love of Hashem, this incredible reverence of Hashem, and naturally, because of that, they're going to align with whatever Hashem wants. So there's no longer the experience of temptation or laziness or any of the other vices that we have in that world of Yetzirah. Beyond that is this world called Bria. Bria, which is the world of creation. That is what we call the higher dimension of Gan Eden, which is reserved for the most pious of souls. And that's where you get the biggest or the greatest of the angels. Like, for example, the ones we talk about in our davening before the Shema, the Seraphim, the Oifanim, Chayas HaKodesh, like these really elevated kinds of angels. They live in this higher realm. The realm of Atzilus, there are no created beings. The realm of Atzilus is where Hashem expresses himself in specific ways. In other words, Hashem is infinite. So for Hashem to express himself as loving, or as like we just saw recently in the parasha, as the warrior at the sea, any of those expressions of Hashem, that's obviously not how Hashem really is. Hashem is not bound by kindness, nor is he bound by being a warrior. Hashem is infinite. So therefore, when he expresses himself in a particular way, we call that this world of Atzilus. Now, I know that's a lot of information to swallow all at once. So hold that thought. We're going to try and kind of construct it a little bit better. Now, let's assume for one moment, we're going to use the human example because, like I said, Hashem designed us in such a way that we could look at ourselves and therefore understand a little bit of what's going on in the spiritual world. So let's look at ourselves for a moment. Let's say that you wake up in the morning, and at that moment that you wake up, the Moedeh Ani moment, for hundreds and hundreds of years, the very first thing that a Jewish person ever did when they woke up in the morning was to say Moedeh Ani. Nowadays, the very first thing you do is press snooze. So, see, on cue. So when you wake up first thing in the morning, who is there? It's a funny question, but let's just think about this for a moment. Who is there when you wake up first thing in the morning? No, I'm saying who is there when you wake up? Who? You, right? You. And who is this you at that time of the morning? Who is this you? Hopefully. If you had enough sleep, if you didn't doom scroll through social media half the night, then hopefully you wake up in the morning and you are a renewed you, right? May not be the case. So who are you? Who are you at this point in time? Okay, let me be a little bit more specific. Let's say that a person, for example, has a whole lot of relatives. So you might be a mother, a daughter, a sister, a wife, a grandmother. So which one of those wakes up in the morning?
Me.
What does me mean? Exactly. What does me mean? None of those. None of those. You are not yet the grandmother, wife, sister, daughter, whatever. You're not yet. That's one layer of self you're still going to put on when you get ready to engage with those people. But until you actually engage those people, you are not yet any of those things. You're actually just you. Let's say that a person has a particular qualification. Let's say that a person has a PhD. When you wake up in the morning, does the PhD wake up in the morning? No, you wake up in the morning, and at some point during the course of the day, if your PhD is relevant to what you're doing in the day, then that part of you wakes up. Right? And so on and so forth. You get the idea. So if you have a particular job that you do, etc., etc. When you wake up in the morning, that is the closest that you experience yourself. And then we start to put on, in the same way as we get up in the morning, we dress, and we do all the self-grooming, in the same way we also put on the layers of personality to be able to go face the world. But it's in that original seminal moment when we wake up in the morning, that is me. So we're going to say that represents, so to speak, this world called Atzilus. That's like Hashem himself, so to speak. It's not Hashem the creator. It's not Hashem the one running the world. It's not Hashem who heals the sick and who fights our wars and miraculously makes terrorists put the wrong timers on the bus bombs. That we're not there yet. This is Hashem, so to speak, as he is. So the word Atzilus appears in the Torah. It appears when Hashem tells Moshe to give divine inspiration to the 70 elders. Vayotzel min haruach asher alav. There's the word. Vayotzel, he emanated some of his own spirit, and that is what ignited the souls of all of these people to become the leadership of the Jewish people, the spiritual leaders. So it means he's giving himself. Atzilus is sharing yourself. Okay, now you get up in the morning and you have a particular task that you have to do today. Your particular task is you've been grappling for a few days with a particular problem, whatever that problem is, and you've got to come up with a solution for that problem. So today is your day of brainstorming the solution to that problem. And partway through the day, you have your aha moment, and there you go. You've found the solution to the problem. What is that called? When you find a solution that you did not have before, you call that inspiration. That's true. So you have experienced inspiration. It's called what? Chokhmah is true. What are you doing at this point? At this point, you have created Not that you can take all the credit, obviously, because inspiration comes from elsewhere, but that is an experience of having now created an idea that previously was not there. Because as the Ramban tells us right in the beginning of the Chumash, the definition of the word boire or bara or bria, which is creation, is yesh me'ayin, to create something where previously there was nothing. So the same concept. When you wake up in the morning, there is nothing else besides you. As the day goes, you start to create all these personas that are necessary in order to get through the day. But they're actually not really you. So they're ayin. They're not really you. You just need to generate them in order to be able to interact with the world, in order to be a contributor to society. So in the same way, when Hashem creates the world, how does Hashem create? Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. And what does it say? Es hashamayim v'sa'aretz l'rabos kol tzava'ehem. That Hashem created everything. There's a very interesting debate amongst many great thinkers in Judaism how creation worked. But one thing is for sure: the original seed of creation that came out of nowhere contained in it the DNA for everything that would later emerge. So how exactly it emerged is irrelevant, but there's now the creation of something from nothing. That's different to Yetzirah. Yetzirah means to form something. Form means that you already have material, and now you're forming that material into a particular shape, size, function, etc. So Yetzirah is like taking paint and putting it on a canvas, or taking clay and molding it into a particular shape. So Bria is when you're creating something that was not there. Yetzirah is when you're taking things that were already there and you're giving them some kind of identity. And then...
Do you think Surah could come from here?
You mean Surah as in a rock?
Well, both.
Because Surah as in like an image, yes. Well, that's Tziyur, right?
Yeah.
Tziyur, Litzayer. Okay? Got to be careful because the word Tsar is also very similar, right? Which Tsaros is very similar, not the same. So this is a Yud Tzadik Reish root, not a Tzadik Reish Hey root. So it's just, or even a Tzadik Vav Reish Yud, right? That's a Yud Tzadik Reish root. Okay, and then the last part of everything is called Asiyah, which is when you take whatever it is that you've either brainstormed or invented or now created, and you actually put it into action. So action has this real paradox about it, because on the one hand, it's the goal that you were working towards, and on the other hand, it's the least sophisticated part of the process. I mean, you had to take so many steps to get to the point that you could put something into action, that it's the least sophisticated part of the process. And that's exactly what he's telling us over here. That Kol ma shebara HaKadosh Baruch Hu be'olamoi, everything that Hashem created in his world, Loi bara'oi ela lichvoidoi, he didn't create for any other purpose except for his honor. Now, he has to explain to us what that means. When he says, whatever Hashem created in his world, he created for his honor, he has to explain what did he create. And so he tells us that he created 4 different realities, 4 completely different dimensions. One is called Kavoidi, it's still attached to Hashem. That's the reality of divine revelation. There are 2 that are revelations of spiritual beings, the creation of spiritual realities, the higher and lower spiritual realms. And then there is Af, it's separated, that's why it's Af, it's separated from the others, because Asiyah is the only reality that also has a physical component to it. So that's what he's telling us. People think, it's just a natural way that our minds would go. People think that Hashem created the spiritual for his honor and glory, and the physical is like a necessary evil. It's just unfortunate. It's unfortunate. Humans have to live. We need certain things. You know, it's like the Gemara tells us that Hillel Hazaken, the great original Hillel, because there are various Hillels in our history. So it says when he used to go to eat, he used to say that he's about to do Gemilus Chasadim im Ho'aluva Hazor. I'm going to do kindness to this Nebuch. He was referring to his body. You know, this misken, as we say in Hebrew, this wretched, poor individual that needs to be fed. So many people misinterpret what Hillel was saying, that the body is like a necessary evil, and therefore human physical experiences are a necessary evil. And therefore you'd expect that whatever is created for Hashem's glory will be reserved for the spiritual realms. That's the point over here. He's saying it doesn't work that way. Rather, what is created is every single facet is created for Hashem's glory. And this might be one of the most important lessons that we could ever learn. Because he's illustrating to us the distinction between 4 totally different realities. You know why that's relevant? Because we all live in totally different realities to each other. That's the fact. We live in totally different realities to each other, number one. Number two, in our own lives, there are elements of our lives that have totally different values. In other words, let's talk firstly about our lives. Let's say, for argument's sake, you have a very dear siddur that you've had for many, many years, and you've davened and cried over it many, many times. That siddur obviously is really valuable to you. It's sentimental, and it obviously has spiritual value. So in our minds, that siddur is obviously something which is there to bring Hashem's honor into the world. And then we might have something else in our lives. For example, I don't want to say this, but unfortunately, you might have a smartphone, which is not designed necessarily to bring holiness and Hashem's honor into the world. So for many of us, we grapple with that because I get the value of the siddur, but I don't really see the value, and in fact, there might be the opposite of value, the smartphone. So this is part of what he's addressing over here. He's telling us that Hashem creates the world in such a way that there is diversity, there are different things. On the one hand, there's an Atzilus dimension of the world that is completely holy, completely one with God. And on the other hand, there's an Asiya dimension of the world where there's the possibility of distraction and poor behavior and poor choices. And it's all created for Hashem's glory. And I go, whoa, hang on a second. All created for Hashem's glory. So you mean it's not only the high level spiritual aligned stuff that is there for Hashem's glory. Everything is part of Hashem's glory. How does that work? So that's the first thing we've got to try and understand. And the same thing applies, obviously, to individuals. Because just like you've got these four different realities, Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, which really describe totally different levels of connection or commitment to Hashem, so you have different people. So if we had to, for example, describe the world of Asiya, as already mentioned, Asiya is a world of action, right? This is the place where what you do counts more than anything else. So you could have all the greatest intentions in the world. If those intentions do not translate into action, you haven't left the starting blocks. Whereas if you went ahead and did what was expected, even if you didn't necessarily have the right intentions, you get the value. And anybody, by the way, knows that if somebody's been going through a difficult time and you pick up the phone and you call them, they don't question your motivation. They appreciate the call. Whereas if you see them 3 months later and say, I meant to call you, but I was trying to get my motivation right, at that point, they won't necessarily have much patience for you, right? So we live in a world of action. But if you lived in the world of Yetzirah, action would not be sufficient. So could you imagine an Neshama in Gan Eden? Gan Eden is not a place of action. This is the world of action. So what happens in the world of Yetzirah? That is an environment of, as I mentioned before, of deep emotional attachment. Now, there are some people who, even while they're living in this world, that is their avodah. That is how they connect with Hashem. Not to say that they don't do actions. Of course they do, because you're required to do mitzvahs no matter who you are. But their experience of those mitzvahs is very profound emotionally. So they live with a tremendous love of Hashem. They live with a tremendous reverence of Hashem. And in all likelihood, these are not necessarily even people we know, because yes, we do know people who are very passionate, but I'm talking now at a very great level. Typically, somebody who's living on earth with an awareness at the level of Yetzirah typically is on the cusp of probably almost a tzaddik, with that level of passion and dedication. And when you have that level of passion and dedication, there isn't the option really of doing anything contrary to what Hashem wants. Because think about it this way. If there's somebody who you really care about, or somebody who you love deeply, and then you feel that they're there, in other words, they're in the same room as you, you're not going to do something which they would be upset by. So that's the kind of consciousness that somebody would have. There are such people, even as we live on this earth. Then you have this world of Bria. Bria is a world where not only do they have a deep emotional attachment to Hashem, but the beings who live in Bria, which is called the higher Gan Eden, which is the higher angels, is that they have a very profound intellectual appreciation of Hashem. Not only emotion, they have a deep intellectual appreciation of Hashem. That means they actually know stuff. They actually know Hashem in a very profound way, not like we who read things in a book and we think we know what we're talking about, but honestly, we really have no clue. They have this deep, profound association and connection with Hashem. And there are people in our world who live with that level of consciousness, and those are generally who we call tzaddikim. They live with that consciousness. They don't just feel an emotional connection to Hashem, they have a profound appreciation for Hashem. And let's just be clear, it's an appreciation of Hashem, not an understanding of Hashem, because you can't really understand Hashem, right? We need to just be clear about that. And then, if a person were theoretically, and it's highly theoretical, to live in the world of Atzilus, why do I say it's highly theoretical? Because Atzilus, you don't feel separate from Hashem. But at the same time, that's where all of our neshamas began. So if you really had to dig to the depth of our neshama feels part of Hashem no matter what happens. It's just that we're not conscious of that part of our neshama. So if a person was living at that level of dedication to Hashem, of that level of connection, not only would that person be totally dedicated to Hashem, but that person, every action that they took in their lives would be an expression of Hashem in that moment. For example, we say Moshe, when he spoke, the Shekhinah was speaking through Moshe. That means he's at that level of connection. He's not living like we do in this world and with all the distractions and vices that we have. He's just emanating, because that's what it means, to emanate godliness into the world. So the message over here is to tell us that no matter what's going on in the world, no matter what we are, no matter what we're dealing with, everything is created for Hashem's honor. And that is, in a sense, like the summary of the whole of Pirkei Avos. Because the whole of Pirkei Avos told us, remember the positioning statement of Pirkei Avos from the Gemara in Bava Kama was that if a person wants to learn Midas Chasidus, which means you want to learn how to go beyond the letter of the law, you have to learn Pirkei Avos. That's what this whole tractate has been telling us. How do we live with a dedication to Hashem that goes beyond just the checklist of the laws? And when we summarize all of that by saying, well, that's when we realize that everything that was created in the world was created lich voy doi, to bring honor to Hashem, which means to bring Torah value to those things, because that is how we honor Hashem. Therefore, it's not enough to live our lives just fulfilling mitzvahs, because then we're saying there are other areas of life outside of the mandate of Torah mitzvahs that are not part of the journey of reflecting godliness into the world. That isn't possible. In fact, not only do we say that everything in the world was created for Hashem's honor, for Hashem's glory, but the Mishnah says, Loi bera'oi elo lichvoidoi. It has no other value or purpose, which essentially means if we take things in our lives, the obvious exception is something that the Torah does not allow us to engage with, well, then we have to let it go. But if we take things in our lives and we do not link them to Torah, we do not use them as a mechanism for expressing godliness in this world, then not only are we not aligning with what Hashem wants, but we're denying what the real purpose of their creation is. That's what it's telling us over here. Loi bera'oi ela lichvoida. There's no other reason that all of these things would have been created except to serve Hashem. That's what we have to know. So it doesn't matter if it's something atzilus, like I'm learning Torah, or it's something asiya, like how I'm using my phone or eating lunch. The fact is, loi bera'oi ela lichvoidoi. Nothing was created other than to serve Hashem. Therefore, my motivation in life has to be not just to be so-called, quote-unquote, religious, but to be beyond that, to find Hashem and find the Torah link in every single part of life. Now, you might have a question about this. Question is, but some things are bad. Some things are toxic. Some things the Torah tells us we're not allowed to engage with them. So how could everything be created for Hashem's glory if there are certain things where, frankly, the correct approach is either to avoid or sometimes even to eradicate? We even have mitzvahs in the Torah about certain things that we have to eradicate. So how can you tell me that everything was created for Hashem's glory? And that's why he uses the word be'olamoi, in his world, not the world, in his world. Now, anybody who's familiar with Torah grammar, you'll know that the word olam has a number of meanings. The most obvious meaning is world. What's the next, so to speak, most obvious meaning?
Yes.
To hide, to conceal, right? Laha'alim is to hide, so olam is something which is hidden. And that speaks to the reality that Hashem is hidden in our world. What is most commonly used in Torah, in Chumash? What's the most commonly used form of the word olam?
Yeah.
Nope, not in the Chumash. In the Chumash, what do we have? It was in the parasha we read this Shabbos. What does it say in the parasha we read the Shabbos? What happens if a person is an Eved Ivri, is a Jewish slave, in which case they're only supposed to be a slave for 6 years, but this person decides that they want to extend their time as a slave. So we go through this interesting ritual with the door and the ear and the nail, and then what does it say? Va'avodoi le'olam. And it says that person will then be a slave le'olam. What does le'olam mean? Forever. Says Rashi straight away, what does le'olam mean? Le'olamoi shel yovel. It means the time frame until the yovel jubilee year, which is every 50th year. That's the maximum time that he could be a slave. In other words, olamoi means a time frame belonging to a particular either individual or a particular chapter of time. So a yovel is a chapter of time. Be'olamoi means Hashem's time. Hashem's forever. Kol ma shebara kadosh baruch hu be'olamoi, everything that Hashem created in His world with the potential of lasting forever, lo bara'oi ela lichvodo, is there for His honor. But anything which was originally designed to eventually disappear is not there to bring His honor. What was designed to eventually disappear? The promise is that when Mashiach comes, then Hashem is going to remove all impurity from the world. So anything that is associated with impurity, with evil, with transgressions, all of that is not oilamoi, is not that which is to be forever. And therefore, the only way that we can engage with it is stay away from it. Or in certain cases, you have to eradicate it, whether it's like chometz or amalek. Certain things you have to eradicate. But anything which is be'olamoi, and be means in, that has the capacity to be included in eternity, which means parav, neutral things, not only mitzvahs, obviously mitzvahs are eternal, that goes without saying, but parav, neutral things like money or food or technology, those that's where we often make the mistake. We look at those things and say, well, they have nothing to do with Judaism, so maybe I do, maybe I don't engage with them, or the way that I engage with them may or may not be associated with my Jewish experience. That's the message of this Mishnah. No, anything that is be'olamoi, that has the potential to come into the world of holiness, to be incorporated into our Jewish journey, and therefore to have eternal value, has no other value except for that, which means anytime that I use my phone to scroll through social media or to play Sudoku, that is an affront to Hashem, because the only reason He created a smartphone was that you could have a shira with you wherever you go in the world, at any time. That's why He created them. That's the message of this Mishnah. So let's go right back to the beginning. How did we start Pirkei Avos? We started Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. That just tells us that Moshe began a journey. Kibel, he received the Torah. Once you've received the Torah, that's when the real work begins. You don't just receive the Torah and the next thing you're a great scholar and you've integrated all of its teachings into your life. The first step is to accept the Torah. That's how we began this journey all the way back in Mishnah 1, chapter 1. But here, now we've gone through all of this Pirkei Avos, we have now graduated to the point that not only are we receiving the Torah as some kind of guidebook that we will begin to learn, but we have now learned so much and we've integrated this information so deeply that we could look at the entire world and see it as part of our spiritual journey. That's, so to speak, how you graduate at this point of Pirkei Avos. And therefore he concludes by telling us, Hashem yimloich la'olam va'ed. The very last quotation, it's quite a powerful quotation to end the whole of Pirkei Avos. Hashem yimloich la'olam va'ed. That Hashem will be the ruler, or Hashem will rule forever. So first of all, that's obviously a very important message because it ties into this oilamoi, right? That there are those things that are for eternity. And which are the things that are for eternity? The things that are associated with Hashem. But it's also telling us practically what lies at the core of us getting this right. Because the balancing act of Judaism, and it's such a subtle balancing act that many, many people grapple with it, is trying to balance dedication to Hashem and personal fulfillment. It's a very delicate balance. Because there are those who'll tell you that, look, all you got to do is whatever Hashem wants. What's the difference what happens to you? What's the difference if you do or don't ever get to express your personal greatness, your talents, your ability? What's the difference? As long as you're doing what Hashem wants. And then there are other people who say, well, ultimately Hashem created you in a particular way. He made you. He only made one of you in the whole of history, as the Gemara tells us, in the same way as no two people have the same face, no two people have the same mind. So there's only one version of you that was ever created. So some people tell you, like all the motivational speakers, you've got to find your strength, you've got to find your greatness, you've got to shine, you've got to fill your cup, you've got to put yourself first. So it's a fine balance. How do you balance the two? That's what he tells us at the end of this mission, because we have to step into the world. And we have to recognize that everything Hashem created in his world, including our talents, including what makes me, me. He did not create any of that to service us. He created all of it so we could service him. That's what the Maharal says on this Mishnah. He says, a person might think after last Mishnah that, listen, the Torah is really, really important. In fact, this whole chapter has told us that the Torah is really important. Maybe the Torah is a tool that I use to make myself a better person. So therefore he comes at this point and tells us, no, all of that is lichvoi doi. It's all for Hashem's greatness. For Hashem. In other words, when we celebrate our unique abilities, and when we develop our unique abilities, and when we use our unique circumstances to fulfill Hashem's purpose, that is lichvoidoi. That is us serving Hashem rather than us riding on Hashem's gifts or brachas and servicing ourselves. And therefore, he concludes with Hashem Yimloich L'olam Bayit, that the ultimate is that Hashem Yimloich. Yimloich does not just mean rule; it means specifically to rule as a king. And the way that a king works is that all of the people who live in the kingdom have to equally submit to the king. That means every single person has a different role. One person is the prime minister, the other person is a farmer. And they all have to live their particular role to the best of their ability, but underpinning that role is an equal dedication to Hashem. And that's his final message over here. There's lichvoidi, berasiv, yitzarati, vasisiv. There are many different levels. No two people are the same. We're all at different spiritual stages of our development. We all have our own talents. We all have to use it to express Hashem's kavod, because if we don't, then that part of ourselves or that part of our world didn't deserve to be created. But what's going to get us there is an equal appreciation that every single one of us has, which is Hashem Yimloich L'olam Bayit. Hashem is the king. Hashem will always be the king. And therefore, our positioning statement has to be dedication. We're dedicated to do what Hashem wants. That may look different for each of us, but what feeds it, what drives it, is the same principle: absolute dedication to Hashem. If we have absolute dedication to Hashem, then we will never live just by the letter of the law. We'll always be looking to do more than what is required, and therefore we'll fulfill what Pirkei Avos is all about, mili de chasidusa, to be able to live beyond the letter of the law.